I'm glad we started this series. Like I said, I actually want to watch more of Invicta, especially its units of history, which I think will begin tomorrow with the war elephant. I might have it already posted under my post. Um, but yeah, I want to watch more of Invicta because it's so refreshing to see, expand my horizon of historical YouTubers. And yeah, I love this series. This series was great. It was refreshing. It's just what I needed. and I'm becoming a big fan of this guy and his work. So yeah, overall, I have to say that we're about to finally get to the conclusion of the Sicilian Wars. So let's just do it. Without any further ado, let's watch the seventh and final Sicilian War by the Great Invicta.
A Greek army stands before the walls of mighty Carthage for the first time in history. But what is even more astonishing than the way in which they arrived here is what they would go on to do next. This is the climax of the Punic-Sicilian Wars. Timoleon of Corinth had emerged as an unlikely hero to the Greeks of Sicily. Against all odds, he put down the despots, subdued the foreign enemy, recolonized the greatest among the ruined cities, and restored their laws, their constitution, and their democracy. As Plutarch put it, quote, "In less than 8 years, he had handed over to her inhabitants a Sicily purged of her perpetual intestine miseries and complaints." And yet, with the death of Timoleon came an end to this brief interlude of peace. Without a strong guiding hand, the island reverted to its chaotic ways. Soon, Timoleon's democratic system in Syracuse became corrupted by factions and morphed into a despotic oligarchy. In this environment, many ambitious men would make a play for ultimate power. One among them would be a man by the name of Agathocles. The son of a potter from the city of Himera, he was an unlikely candidate for this emerging Game of Thrones. Around the age of 18, he had moved to Syracuse to take up his father's profession, but soon joined the army. By the age of 28, the historian Justin claims that he had risen quite high in rank and came into significant wealth through marriage. This then allowed him to start leveraging both to attain greater power. In these efforts, he was apparently banished not once but twice from the city for attempting to overthrow the reigning oligarchs. Ever the persistent man, he would not so easily be defeated. For several years, Agathocles took up the cause of nearby Morgantina, leading her armies into battle against local rivals such as Leontini. However, in 317 BC, at the age of 44, he now turned his sights against Syracuse. At the head of a mercenary force, Agathocles now laid siege to his former home. In a further twist, the Syracusans called upon their foes, the Carthaginians, for aid.
What are these dynamics going on? Well, that's sad, Timoleon, established, overall just proved to be the greatest man in the world at that point in Sicily, establishing peace and prosperity, and then for everything to fall apart. Well, that's kind of the thing, though, sometimes in history, obviously, you can be a great ruler yourself. I mean, granted, I'm not sure ruler is what he'd like to be known as, but he was the guy basically in charge of everything, kind of running things, essentially, keeping everything in line. But again, like, if you don't have, like, a strong follow-up or some type of strong follow-up, whether that be through another individual or system, everything falls apart. And obviously, he just explained that democracy just broke down through corruption, and it's a little tragic, actually, that, for a second there's like, wow, everything is just great, everything's going great for the Greeks, and then just back to everyone fighting. But man, it's so weird now that freaking Syracuse, like, help us Carthage. That's a weird turn of events there in this war.
Hamilcar, the current commander of Punic forces in Sicily, responded by sending them a body of several thousand men. As Justin put it, quote, "Thus, at one and the same time, Syracuse was both defended by an enemy with the love of a citizen, and attacked by a citizen with the hatred of an enemy." But the twist did not stop there. Apparently Agathocles and Hamilcar would now enter secret dealings whereby the Carthaginians would allow the upstart to take Syracuse on condition that he repay them with favorable terms and assurances of peace. When this was agreed to, Agathocles entered the city with his men. It seems that to facilitate this move, he played the part of a new Timoleon, ready to cleanse Syracuse of its despotic rulers and restore democracy. However,
Imagine being a
here is what Justin describes happened next. Quote, "Then, as if intending to remodel the Constitution, he ordered the people to be summoned to an assembly in the theater, convoking the Senate in the meantime in the gymnasium, as though he designed to make some previous arrangements with them. His measures thus being taken, he sent his troops to surround the people and caused the Senate to be massacred, and when he had finished the slaughter of them, cut off the richest and boldest of the commoners. Through this reign of..."
Yeah, he ain't Timoleon. He's like, yeah, no, I ain't Timoleon. JK. Oh man, dude. Brutal. But again, like... yeah. That's brutal. I think that's kind of gonna set that I'm assuming this is about to go completely south for Carthage, since the opening shows that their homeland is attacked, so... Agathocles? Is that how you say it? Probably ain't the most trustworthy of guys, if this is anything to go by, right?
terror, Agathocles now enshrined himself as the undisputed tyrant of Syracuse. His first move was to follow in the footsteps of many of his predecessors by raising a strong army and fleet. These he now unleashed upon Sicily, subduing large parts of the island. Carthage was incensed by these events and the fact that their general seemed to have been colluding with the enemy to further his own ambitions.
Well, why is this becoming a trend that Carthaginian generals either abandon their allies or just don't help them, and then freaking Carthage back at home keeps getting pissed off at them? Freaking Carthage, man, like, they had great momentum during, like, the Second War when they won, and then just from then on, they've just been going downhill. Like, I'm kind of disappointed in Carthage in the overall sense, you know? But, yeah.
Thus, the Punic Senate voted to take action against this rogue commander. The gods, however, would act first. Hamilcar would die before the wrath of Carthage could be unleashed upon him. Instead, it would now be turned upon Agathocles, who had already begun raiding Punic allies. In 311 BC, Carthage raised a fleet of 130 triremes and several hundred supply ships to carry a force of 14,000 soldiers, including citizens, Libyans, Balearics, and mixed mercenaries. At their helm was Hamilcar, son of Gisco. Yet while they set off with great zeal, the ocean tempered their passion with a storm. Here, the brutal winds and waves claimed almost half of the...
Freaking Carthage, guys. Freaking Carthage. These guys, man. That sucks. That sucks.
The fleet. Thankfully, when they arrived in Sicily, they would be reinforced by the Carthaginians already on the island, by local allies, and by additional mercenaries. Soon, their forces swelled to around 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. With little delay, they began to advance. Hamilcar led his forces towards the Syracusan-held city of Gela. Fearing the loss of this important bastion, Agathocles moved to counter them with an army of almost equal size. The two sides soon found themselves encamped atop hills to either side of the Himera River. From such a position, the advantage would go to the defender of any engagement. Thus it was that for many days they stood at a stalemate. To break the impasse, either side now resorted to raids and ambushes on each other's supply lines. At one point, a band of Greeks attempting to rustle Punic livestock were chased off by the Carthaginians. However, as these reached the river, Agathocles set upon them with an ambush. Such an event was not too uncommon. However, this time, the tyrant decided to follow up on this skirmish by suddenly mobilizing his entire army for a full-scale assault. With lightning speed, the Greeks now swarmed over the river and were upon the Punic camp before the Carthaginians had a chance to form a battle line. As the palisades began to fall, a fierce battle ensued all along the ditch and rampart. Plutarch notes that Hamilcar reacted quickly. Quote, "He brought up his slingers who came from the Balearic Islands and numbered..."
You know, slingers are a very underrated, like, unit in history. Like, they're actually incredibly, like, brutal. I think even the Romans, like, most Roman soldiers were taught to use slings. Because, like, You know, like, it's like basically like almost like wielding a gun in a sense. Like a good slinger just like hits you instant death if he gets you or breaks your bones. Like slings are a very underrated weapon, but actually incredibly powerful, especially if you just have a full-on army of slingers just throwing at you. Um, you know, it's funny. I've heard like some funny excerpts that some slingers would write insult on the rocks or stones that they that they threw at their enemies. But yeah, there's a reason David killed Goliath with like one sling throw. You know, don't underestimate the power. It's not like the most epic of weapons, like a sword or a giant spear or anything, but it is underrated but powerful. Again, so it's just giving some love to my slingers out there. But yeah.
At least 1,000. By hurling a shower of great stones, they wounded many, and even killed not a few who were attacking, and they shattered the defensive armor of most of them. In this way, they drove the Greeks from the camp and defeated them. But Agathocles continued to attack at other points, and indeed the camp was already being taken by storm, when unexpected reinforcements from Libya arrived by water for the Carthaginians. Thus again, gaining heart, those from the camp fought against the Greeks in front, and the reinforcements surrounded them on all sides.
Oh wow.
Since the Greeks were now receiving wounds from an unexpected quarter, the battle quickly reversed itself, and some of them fled into the Hermaeus River, others into the camp. The withdrawal was for a distance of 40 stades, and since it was almost entirely over level country, they were hotly pursued by the barbarian cavalry, numbering not less than 5,000. As a result, the space between was filled with dead, and the river itself contributed greatly to the destruction of the Greeks. In the aftermath,
I have to say though, Agathocles definitely had a very audacious move there that, you know, basically almost trying to blitz the Carthaginians, catch them unawares. But I have to give it a Carthage. They rebounded perfectly. Like, normally I thought, like, oh, that's it. Like, Agathocles is gonna win. But Carthage managed to rebound incredibly, like I said, beautifully at that battle. And even gave Agathocles essentially an L right there. So, good on you, Carthage. Good on you, dudes.
Agathocles managed to escape with the remainder of his army and regroup in nearby Gela. Rather than attack this fortress, Hamilcar set about stripping away the now undefended allies of Syracuse. Many now switched sides. Agathocles in turn withdrew to his home base. His prospects for defeating the superior Carthaginian land and sea forces in Sicily were bleak. And yet, it was this very desperation that would bring about a most diabolical plan. First, he would need to recover his strength and his supplies. To this end, we are told that he culled the grain from the surrounding region, borrowed heavily from the merchants, withdrew dedications from the temples, stripped the women of their jewels, confiscated property, carried out purges, and undertook many unholy acts to gain an abundance of wealth. After this, he freed many slaves and armed them while enrolling additional forces to build both a strong garrison and offensive army. Between these, he made sure to split up family members such that they would not revolt out of fear of what might happen to their relatives. Then, 60 ships were summoned to port for a secret mission. Some believed their purpose was to break the Punic blockade or to raid the enemy's rear lines. However, when it came time to sail, none of these proved accurate. Agathocles shot his fleet like an arrow out to the open sea. The Carthaginians, initially believing this to be a challenge, deployed for battle. Yet when they saw that the Greeks did not do likewise, they gave pursuit. Here is how Justin puts it. Quote, "After they had sailed for 6 days and the same number of nights, just as day was breaking, the fleet of Carthaginians was unexpectedly seen not far away. At this, both fleets were filled with zeal and vied with each other in rowing. When Libya came into sight, the men on board began to cheer, and the rivalry became very keen. The ships of the barbarians sailed faster since their crews had undergone very long training, but those of the Greeks had sufficient lead. The distance was covered very quickly, and when the ships drew near the land, they rushed side by side.
Holy crap, I see the plan. Alright, that explains the opening. So his solution is just to jump cart it. That is interesting. That is an interesting move that Agathocles has made. He know the situation on Sicily is completely bleak, as he's lost and he knows he can't defeat the Carthaginians in sea. So what does he do? changes the theater of war to take the pressure off of him and Syracuse and directly into Carthage. Dang, man. It's kind of like when Hannibal invaded Italy. Instead of like what the Romans would probably have just assaulted Carthage itself, essentially going to put more resources onto their homeland now, since the Greeks are just there. Not gonna lie, that is beyond smart and cunning, and completely takes the pressure off of him. Agathocles is a cruel, brutal person, but man, is he cunning.
The beach, like men in a race. Indeed, since they were within range, the first of the Carthaginian ships were sending missiles at the last of those of Agathocles. Consequently, when they had fought for a short time with bows and slings, and the barbarians had come to close quarters with a few of the Greek ships, Agathocles got the upper hand since he had his complement of soldiers. At this, the Carthaginians withdrew and lay offshore a little beyond bowshot. But Agathocles, having disembarked his soldiers at the place called Latomai and constructed a palisade from sea to sea, pulled his ships ashore. The tyrant had established his beachhead. To signal his determination, Agathocles then burned his own ships. There was no turning back. Sparing little time, he now loosed his men upon the countryside, ravaging farm and fortress alike. This threw the citizens of Carthage into panic. If the Greeks were here, in Africa, then that must mean that a disaster of unprecedented scale had befallen their forces in Sicily. However, such fears subsided when messengers reported that Agathocles had merely run a blockade. Yet even with this assurance, they still had to deal with the enemy, which had managed to reach their front door. Thus, a pair of generals, Hanno and Bomilcar, were appointed to lead a new force raised from the citizenry of Carthage itself. Our sources claim it boasted around 40,000 infantry, 1,000 cavalry, and 2,000 chariots. This massive but untested force now set off to crush the 14,000-man army of Agathocles, which had encamped near the recently sacked town of White Tunis. We are told that the Carthaginians arranged themselves as follows: Hanno with the sacred band on the right, Bomilcar with a deep phalanx on the left, and the remaining infantry in the center, with cavalry and chariots arranged in the front. In response, Agathocles took the left wing with his personal guard and 1,000 hoplites. The right was commanded by his son, with some 2,500 infantry, while the remaining 9,000 force of mixed infantry took the center. Finally, some 500 archers and slingers were divided between the wings. Diodorus Siculus further enhances this story by claiming that Agathocles had his rowers take up shield covers and sticks to pose as additional infantry, while owls were released among the men to assure them that Athena watched over their ranks. Soon, battle would begin with the charge of the Carthaginian chariots. Such a sight would have surely routed a greener force, but Agathocles' men were well disciplined. Arrow fire cut down the incoming ranks, while chariot teams were allowed to pass through the gaps in the line, or even turned back by a stalwart line of spears. Next came the charge of the cavalry, which met a similar fate against the immovable phalanx. But the true test came as the Carthaginian infantry finally advanced in a huge third wave. Diodorus Siculus reports the following, quote, "A gallant battle developed, and Hanno, who had fighting under him the sacred band of selected men, and was intent upon gaining the victory by himself, pressed heavily upon the Greeks, and slew many of them. Even when all kinds of missiles were hurled against him, he would not yield, but pushed on, though suffering many wounds."
How is this gonna go? Like, I'm like, kind of like, I'm like impressed by Agathocles' like audacity. But yeah, the dude just trapped himself in Carthage, and is now like, I'm going to fight you all to, I guess his plan is, you know, go to Carthage itself, and scare them into a peace. Basically force them through the heart of the Carthaginian, government, essentially scare them into a peace deal, and force them into one. That's what I'm assuming is the goal. Yeah. So, that's what I'm assuming he's going for. But again, granted, the Carthaginians might have manpower, but again, they lack discipline and training. And, you know, they're more green forces against more veteran soldiers. That usually never spells well, but then again, who knows?
Hanno and the Punic elites very nearly achieved a breakthrough. When their general was struck down, this momentum ground to a halt. Agathocles in turn struck back, pressing the Carthaginian wing all the harder. Diodorus Siculus claims that upon hearing this news, the general Bomilcar attempted to withdraw his own forces to more defensible high ground. Supposedly, this was out of a desire to doom the nobility of the Sacred Band, which were his rivals back in Carthage. Whatever the case, this ploy failed spectacularly as the redeployment quickly dissolved into a rout. Agathocles and his men now swept over the battlefield. Without cavalry, their range proved limited, but those who fell into their grasp were slaughtered. All told, our sources claim that just a few hundred Greeks were killed, while several thousand Carthaginians were lost. In the aftermath, Agathocles plundered the Punic camp and advanced to the very walls of Carthage. This would be the first time that a Greek army had gazed upon the city in 2 centuries of conflicts between the rivals. Inside, the Carthaginians were in an uproar, believing that the gods had turned against them. To atone for their sins, massive offerings of gold and sacrifice were reportedly carried out. Ships were also sent to Sicily, begging Hamilcar to return. Instead, the general opted to besiege Syracuse while spreading propaganda that Agathocles had been destroyed. He was gambling on a base race. This was a rather prudent move. After all, the Greek siege of Carthage was ultimately symbolic, given their small size. But Agathocles would find other ways to undermine his foes. The invaders now resorted to plundering the countryside. This had the effect of replenishing their supplies. It also convinced several nearby cities to join Agathocles, either out of fear of him or hatred of the Carthaginians. Over the following months, the Greeks slowly but steadily gained control of the regions around Carthage. Neapolis, Thapsus, Hadrumentum.
That's insane. He's literally like building a base around in Carthage's like front door. That is insane.
Were all put to siege. The assault upon Utica was especially brutal. Here, siege engines bearing hanging prisoners were reportedly brought against the wall, and once inside, quote, Agathocles filled the city with slaughter. Some he killed in hand-to-hand fighting. Those who were captured he hanged, and those who had fled to temples and altars of the gods, he cheated of their hopes. All told, some 200 towns and cities were reportedly taken. But the invaders could only be so many places at once. The Carthaginians attempted to take advantage of this by striking at vulnerable positions. Yet Diodorus Siculus reports how Agathocles masterfully used rapid movement and trickery to cover his weaknesses.
This guy's just great. Like, he's cunning, but the way he's reversed this and just like... Look at all this, like, holy crap. Dude. Agathocles, man, like, the man... I don't even know what to say, he's bold AF.
Somehow, against all odds, he was not only surviving, but thriving, deep within enemy lines. From here, things only got worse for Carthage. In 309 BC, Hamilcar would be killed in action with his Sicilian army now fracturing into factions outside the walls of Syracuse. Meanwhile, Bomilcar attempted a coup which threw the Punic government into chaos, while Agathocles saw his forces grow in number by murdering the Greek ruler of Cyrenaica and absorbing his army. Carthage finally caught a break when rebellion began to break out in Sicily against the Syracusans. Agathocles decided to return home to restore order whilst leaving his son Archagathus in command of the African campaign. Affairs in Sicily once more proved incredibly difficult, owing to the treacherous geographic and geopolitical nature of the island. Thus, the tyrant was forced to fight an extended series of grueling campaigns. Meanwhile, his son continued to make progress in Africa by subjugating more towns and striking out into the interior. Yet it seems that Archagathus was stretching himself dangerously thin. It is at this point that Carthage was finally able to settle its internal affairs and prepare for a proper counterattack. Forming 3 separate armies of around 10,000 men each, they now simultaneously assaulted the coast, the Midlands, and the interior. The Greeks responded by splitting their own forces in 3. But Archagathus lacked the genius of his father. In the center, his forces were slaughtered in an ambush, while...
Okay. That's what I was wondering. When Agathocles left, I was wondering how his son was gonna do. Because obviously, with Agathocles there, he was just kind of demolishing everything. Like, the way he was running things was genius. But him leaving his son, obviously I wasn't aware of what his son was capable of, so I kept quiet. But I was like, does the guy have what it takes to hold the line while his dad handles other things? But so far it seems like between stretching himself thin and this first battle, so far we'll see. I mean, it's not over yet, but so far, you know, the loss of Agathocles here might just stop the momentum of the Greeks, you know?
All along the coast, his army was drawn into a trap by feigned flight and equally destroyed. Roughly 12,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry were lost. It was a war-altering disaster.
Oh, crap.
With the Greeks now on the back foot, many of the conquered regions now switched sides back to Carthage. Archagathus soon found himself surrounded and desperately called upon his father for aid. Agathocles quickly won a string of victories to settle affairs in Sicily before sailing to rescue his son. The tyrant managed to rejoin the army and cobbled together a force whose core was made up of some 12,000 infantry, 1,500 horsemen, in addition to an unreliable body of 10,000 Libyans. These he now marched against the Carthaginians, which had similarly pooled their forces into a large army. Either side encamped upon nearby hills.
Okay, thank goodness. Agathocles is doing a lot right now. He's like fighting on Sicily, he's jumping back to Africa, he's like, he's moving quick. But now that he's back, the situation probably could be reversed, because of his genius. But we'll see if the Carthaginians have learned anything. So far, their counterattack was well, but then again, they weren't fighting Agathocles, you know what I mean? So, I guess we're gonna have to see if they've learned or have gotten a little better since their last direct battle with him. This seems like the final battle, because we only have a few minutes left. This seems like the battle to decide, right? The thing is, though, I know from, like, the time of Piers of Epirus and so on and so forth, Carthage still has, like, a presence on Sicily, but, like, Syracuse is also still its own thing. I don't think it was under Carthaginian influence. And even in the Punic Wars, it wasn't completely under Carthaginian influence, so I guess with some of that hindsight, maybe it's probably gonna end up more of a stalemate, not with any one side fully owning Sicily and whatnot. At least that's what I'm assuming from the future series we've seen that take place after this, so I guess we'll see.
Hills. Time was on the Punic side, and thus Agathocles was forced to assault their encampment. Details are sparse. We are told that the battle was hard fought, but that the Greeks were driven back with heavy losses. In the night which followed, Diodorus Siculus reports an incredible series of events. Apparently, the Punic celebrations led to a fire which quickly spread through their camp. Panic spread when false alarms reported that the Greeks were attacking, which then caused the entire army to flee back to nearby Carthage. At the same time, all this noise reportedly caused a similar panic among the Greeks, who were already shaken by their losses. Dawn seems to have cleared up the confusion, but nerves were certainly frayed after such a sleepless night. For Agathocles, the event prompted him to plan a secret escape. When this was discovered, his own army threw him in chains. The tyrant was eventually released, but took the opportunity to flee for good, abandoning his men and his sons.
What the heck? Okay, wow. A lot happened there? Holy crap. Sorry, that caught me off guard. All that caught me off guard, but, okay, so Carthage burns down from partying too hard, scares everyone on both sides. Then Agathocles wants to leave, but apparently his army's like, heck no, so they just chain him up. And then once he's free, he just leaves anyways. Wow. With Agathocles gone, though, like, this might just go back to the Carthaginians.
Remaining Greek forces were now forced to seek pity from the Carthaginians. A deal was struck to negotiate their surrender. However, some chose to resist in the hopes that Agathocles would return to save them with reinforcements. There would be no salvation this time. Carthage swept down upon them with vengeful fury, crucifying their leaders, which included the sons of Agathocles, and enslaving the rest to serve as laborers to toil in the fields they had destroyed. Upon learning of this, the tyrant flew into a rage. He reportedly lashed out against the families of those whom he blamed for contributing to the Greek defeat in Africa, and soon visited upon the people of Sicily many brutalities. Diodorus Siculus reports that, quote, "Because of the multitude of those who had been slain besides its waves, the sea, stained with blood over a great expanse, proclaimed afar the unequaled savagery of this outrage." In 306 BC, Syracuse and Carthage would finally come to terms. Both sides had suffered tremendously in these 5 years of war. It was finally—
Yeah, at least at the end, Carthage managed to repel the Greeks from their homeland. That was the wildest part. That might have been my favorite event of the series of wars. Like, the 7 so far was so wild and everything that happened. It's my favorite of the 7 wars.
Finally time for peace, lest they weaken each other to the point that both collapsed from exhaustion. The terms stipulated that Syracuse would maintain control over eastern Sicily, while Carthage retained control of the west. What followed would be a long-awaited period of peace between bitter enemies. Thus, after 2 centuries of fighting and 7 Punic Sicilian Wars, neither side had ultimately managed to come out on top.
Yeah, basically unconclusive stalemate, essentially, right?
Taking a step back, it's incredible to think how much blood was shed for such little gain. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians were thrown into the meat grinder for the vainglory of their leaders. In many ways, this seemed to prove the folly of anyone attempting to grab control of Sicily. And yet, amid these chapters of history filled with pitfalls of failure, one can also find examples of success. Commanders seeking victory would do well to master these arts of war, while those who ignore them do so at their peril. In the conflicts that loomed on the horizon, we see many examples of both, but their stories will have to wait for another time. I hope you've appreciated this exploration of the—
I very much did, Invicta. That was a great telling. And I must say, overall, yeah, at the end, it amounted to not much. But like I said, I kind of did know that. Mainly from the future videos we saw, Syracuse is still its own independent thing. And, yeah, Carthaginians need to be driven out and whatnot, so... Yeah, at the end, imagine fighting 2 centuries for literally nothing to fully change, that sucks. But, I love this series. I want to watch more of Invicta. This was something I was looking so much more forward to, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of Invicta. So, overall, a great series, and I have to say, Carthage definitely put up a pretty decent fight. It was nice to not just see them get completely demolished like usual, so it was nice to see Carthage actually put up, like, a good fight, I feel. And, yeah, I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow.